So our next speaker is Lisa Skumatz. She's the principal of research and consulting, and by the way, Damon's going to be here all day, at Skumatz Economic Research Association. And she is an economist with 35 years in solid waste research. She has conducted hundreds of solid waste program and policy research around the nation and published more than 125 articles on trash, recycling, and organics, as well as reduction strategies. Lisa is known for her quantitative analysis expertise, and she is focused on research that helps advise and inform program decision-making. This is a little bit headier. So her topic today is every other week collections, the trade-offs and frequencies, new streams and efficiencies, and cost-effectiveness. There's a trick with this thing. This is the advanced button, the one that doesn't have a sticker on it.
I see, okay.
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me back to speak at this great venue. I always learn so much here, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to be talking about every other week and fortnightly collection, but I'm really going to be talking about two main things, both of which you know and you've heard about, but I'm trying to sort of remind you of the numbers that are associated with some of these changes that you could consider making. We used a detailed collection cost model that we have that includes the ability to model both city collection and hauler collection and the differences in hauler practices. And we were able to get a lot of information out of many, many runs of these models. Oh, there we go. You're dealing with lots of different changes all at one time, every day of the week. You know, it's a balancing act, lots of moving parts. Your facilities, your fleet, tonnages that you're trying to increase, a safe solid waste management system, politics, citizen demands, and so on. But one of the things that I urge you to keep in mind is not just maximizing recycling, but also keeping efficiencies in mind as well. And when you're talking about efficiencies, it's a really straightforward thing. It really is very largely about the stops. Stops can be upwards of 80% of the cost of providing a service, and that's a really important thing to minimize or optimize. Given that stops are the main deal here, it means that getting efficiencies are really simple. You either want to get more material in the same number of stops or get the same material in fewer stops. That's pretty much a way of optimizing. And we need to keep evolving because trash collection keeps evolving, and if we don't in recycling and organics, then we're going to have a bigger and bigger gap and a bigger and bigger problem in trying to pay bills, make things seem cost effective, and make it not such a subsidy. We did a study on what are the most cost-effective things that you can do, and going to every other week collection is the second most cost-effective thing you can do. And here's one of the graphs I want you to pay some attention to. The thing across the top says increasing savings, and going down it's increasing diversion. So what we started with in some parts of the country were 3 stops a week, old style. We had trash twice a week and recycling once a week down in the south. Here you started with 2 stops a week for the most part, once recycling and once trash, and you kind of went to the left, going to 3 stops per week with trash, recycling, and organics. That's moving you up in diversion, but it's also increasing your costs. There are other things that you could consider doing, and one of those could be in the middle, going to trash weekly and alternating recycling and organics. You could go to organics weekly and trash and recycling or alternating, and that gets you even more tons. If you could go to 1.5 stops a week, trash every other week, recycling and organics alternating every other week as well, and that reduces your costs because it's fewer stops. You could be maybe in the lower right-hand corner, we could have maybe 1 stop or half a stop a week or something if we're going to go to sort of a Japanese system where there's a lot more sweat equity involved. You can look at a few other options as well, introducing things like wet-dry, introducing possibly mixed waste processing and other things that will help reduce the costs and the collections as well. But I'm going to stick with the sort of tried and true basic systems that I'm talking about. So what are we trying to do? Well, if you go to things like every other week collection of trash, recyclables, and organics, if you go to every other week recycling and/or adding yard waste or yard waste and food, if you go to every other week recycling, you lose a little bit of tons. But I'm going to tell you it's only about 1 to 3 percentage points. At least that's what we found. And if you look at the cost of those marginal tons, you're doing twice as many collections in order to get 1 to 3 additional tons, percent tons, you're going to pay about 3 to 4 times as much for those marginal tons as you do for the base tons. It's a really expensive set of marginal tons. It doesn't really make sense, and you can buy a whole new waste stream almost, the yard waste, with that loss of one collection. So you gain a double-digit stream at the cost of 1 to 3 percentage points, and at a very little, it's nearly free. You can also consider every other week trash and weekly organics. It finally drives the food waste out of the trash stream. It seems to be what it takes to get people to actually make that change. One of the other things that's related, not quite the same, but I wanted to mention, was collection integration. When you're looking at changes in service, it might also be that you're looking at, okay, should we provide this and a hauler provide that under contract and that sort of thing? But we find that there are really significant savings from integrating collections. There is really enough overhead, administration, customer service, contract oversight, and container management, all the rest of that makes a significant difference. So it's worth considering, where can I integrate collections as well in one service provider? How much do you save and how much can you get? Well, collections per hour certainly make a difference. If your collections per hour changes about 20%, it's about 20% worse. It's about 10 to 15% more costs in your collection. If you go to weekly to every other week in the same stream, you can save about 40%, and that's pretty significant. If you go look at tip fee changes, that certainly swings things a bit in trash. When I ran the model starting at 65 as a base amount and went down to 21 and up to 100%, then the trash rates went from about 70% to about 125% of the original cost. There's some trade-offs I'll show you in the next table. And for collection integration, we find savings on the order of 10 to 25%, depending on what kinds of administration there has to be. Let's see. And the one in the lower left says certainly container ownership and payment costs more than 2 to 5%, but there are some communities that are considering not having the haulers pay for the containers, and they don't own them, and that ends up to be really trivial, and there'd be no point in not owning them yourselves. This is just the table of what it takes. The trade-off, if the stops are the same, then the only difference is the difference in tipping fees. Well, you can do a matrix like I did here, and it could be between any of the two streams you're considering trading off. It really breaks down to the bottom one, which is just the difference in those tipping fees. And you can see that based on the difference in the tipping fees, your costs may be as little as, if it's $10 difference, it's whatever the dollars are there. And if it's $90 difference in the tipping fee, you're only talking about $3 in a household's bill. So it really does, pencil out really fast when you're talking about a straight across trade in collections. For examples of every other week trash, there are a number of communities that we can look at around the country. And one of them is Vancouver, Washington, but they have optional every other week trash. And the majority of people still take that $18.74, which is weekly collection of a 32-gallon container. But you can see they do have every other week options as well, and monthly options for a 32-gallon container as well. Portland, Oregon is probably the best example. When they introduced their mandatory every other week collection and added food waste to their existing yard waste container, they went from 54% to 70%, which is a really big change. I don't care how they measure it. I don't care, we can talk about measurement metrics all the time, all you want. But the bottom line is there was a very substantial change. That's almost 50% increase, so that matters a lot. 40%, something like that. One of the things to consider also is whether or not it makes sense for your community. You certainly need to have trucks that are flexible. You need to have the same location for where you're bringing materials. You need to have, single stream certainly helps a lot. Organics processing is essential. I know education, people get very upset about whether or not, we're making so many changes, but I think people would rather, most communities I talked to decided that having people make one set of changes is the most manageable system involved. They understand the old and understand the new system and just go there. So we have to worry about health departments and so on for going to every other week trash, but it's been worked out in more and more communities around the country. One of the other things that comes up is, should we offer it as an option or should we offer it as mandatory? Every town we talked to that went to every other week, they said we wish we'd made it mandatory because by making it optional, we didn't get the collection cost and the truck savings and the fleet savings that we wanted. That in fact they wish they'd gone to mandatory, and that's what Portland definitely recommended. But if you have services that you want to have as an option, you don't want the political blowback, for instance, like we have diapers and we can't possibly keep those for 2 weeks, totally, that you could offer as an optional service for a higher price. Don't cut out options, but rather go ahead and make them more expensive but keep them available, and that helps politically quite a lot. One of the things that worries me a lot, is we go for high impacts, but we aren't always considering the costs as well. And I would rather look at what the marginal cost is and say, gee, if I cut back a little bit on this frequency, I can buy a whole new stream, and that whole new stream is a lot more tons, and overall that makes my system a lot more efficient and effective, and people don't have to pay higher and higher bills in order to fund a system that you're trying to rationalize. One of the things in the early studies that we've done showed that if you made people pay for recycling, their recycling tonnage went down. If you made them pay for yard waste, their yard waste tonnage went down. I realize that you can mandate it back, but why not first consider things like optimizing service instead? So I think it's worth considering being cost effective, and that's not a bad word. We can do continual improvement, and I would say spend your political capital wisely. That's what the numbers tell me. And I would like to be as cost effective as I can and get the most tons I can. Thank you. And stay tuned. Yeah. And stay tuned for some other studies that we're doing on, is the recycle model broken, what pays in terms of adding and subtracting materials, and some organic studies. So
Coming
maybe
soon
next
to
year.
a cart near you. No, wait, we have time for like a couple questions.
Right, great. I couldn't
Here.
read the time, so.
Yeah. Repeat the question.
I could hear
the
in the
question
areas
was,
where.
in the area where you mandated, did you see increased illegal dumping?
I did, in the areas where they've mandated every other week collection, you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
We did some case studies, and I read through those case studies as I was waiting here, and one town mentioned contamination. Most of the rest said there wasn't a problem.